I would like all of you to address something that comes very often when I would talk about video games to anyone, to a lot of people. And that is about the negativity around video games, the effect, the bad effect that video games has on its players. So I would like you to address that and maybe talk about whether if you come across that kind of people when you tell people that you are the people who make video games for a living. Do you come across that kind of comments, that kind of people, and what do you tell them? And I come across these people, this kind of comments not only from the older generation but also from the generation to which many of my students would belong to. So yeah, your comments on that. What do you say about that? Are video games bad? Go
I
ahead.
would just say that, like any entertainment medium, there's good and bad as well. Like with TV, like with films, you can go overboard getting addicted to them and, sort of ruin the rest of your life, not study or not work or whatever. So it's all about moderation and knowing your particular limits. I think video games are certainly more immersive than simply passively sort of consuming TV or books or movies. So that, I suppose, it drives a fair bit of addiction, in people who may be susceptible to that. So it's very important that we are all aware of this and we all take care that this is sort of an enhancement to our life, our entertainment, and it is not something that we sort of, let take control of us.
So that's really interesting, Saumya, and I couldn't agree with you more. What I find interesting also is the concept of flow, which applies, it's a theory of psychology, which colloquially translates to being in the zone. And a lot of, I mean, some of this comes from video game design, but a lot of it is also the act of playing games, the act of the repetitive loop of engaging in that environment puts people in that zone. And what that happens is that you'll end up losing hours and hours to the game. From a game development perspective, that's a really good thing. From the person's sense of personal entertainment, that's a really good thing. The impact on life can, in fact, be detrimental if you're a child supposed to study for your exams. On the topic of, I mean, and the other negative thing you always hear of on video games is how video games promote violence. To date, in all the research one has done, there is no certifiable evidence that says that games teach you how to, or games encourage violent behavior. There is sufficient evidence, and across this talk, I can probably pull up a few citations that I have as well. Some of this was the scope of my own research in the past. There's plenty of evidence which says that people are reasonably consciously aware of the fact that there is a disconnect between a fantastical world where you're killing monsters, for example, versus picking up an Uzi and going and shooting up a school or something. And that's usually the argument that is made in the context of American school shootings and so many other things. And to that, I say that's just, a lot of that is more political bias and media framing than actual like games engendering that.
Adding to both of them, I mean, it's pretty much covered. So actually, Shagun, you mentioned the state of flow, right? And definitely like positive feedback loop is something as game designers, we try to incorporate within the game. And one thing we end up always trying to do is controlling that positive feedback loop also. But the essence for game designers is to put the players in that state where they feel comfortable to repeat that same process, and they're set in that zone. Unfortunately, like any other addiction, there needs to be a control driven for this. So we don't actually focus on alcohol itself as a problem. We are still continuing to make alcohol. We are still continuing to run businesses on alcohol. And yet we know that, there are alcoholics who are creating domestic violence and these all triggers. But I think that's more to do with the person than the product itself. For instance, like Shagun mentioned about exams, and I have been one of that person. During my engineering, Saumya, you used to work for Ragnarok. I used to be one of the very few women who played Ragnarok. And I used to actually play Ragnarok during my engineering exams. I did clear it, But the thing is about balance. And the worst thing I find is that because we collectively do not understand this medium, we try to find faults with it and blame it. So when parents are going to keep telling these teenagers, don't do it, they are just as much more inclined to do it. And that's basic psychology. That's got to do nothing with gaming itself. It's just that gaming became a medium. Before gaming existed, there was something else. So I think like even my nephew, he's about 11 now. We restrict his gaming time. That control needs to be there, but we have not snatched it away from him. He still looks forward to his gaming time. He knows that it needs to be in control. Everything has to be balanced. So as people, we understand what gaming is, what kind of positive benefits it can bring. I think that needs to be there. Otherwise, take movie, take any form of addiction series, any of that can be something that takes away your time and takes you away from what you're supposed to do.
Right. Saumya, you would like to add something to that?
Yeah, certainly. I think, we pretty much covered everything. That's exactly what I would say as well.
Right. All right. Yeah. So, yeah, I think looking at it from a media studies perspective, this blaming thing that all three of you mentioned has been there for all sorts of media. So even and something as simple as books. Can you imagine that when books were first printed by Gutenberg, and at that time people were objecting to publishing of books. There were people who would object to the publishing of books. And this has happened with almost all media. Any form of new media that has come up at different points in the history, they have been blamed by people as something evil and something which is not required, something that is going to affect the society, a good for the good or for the bad, that is for us to decide, like you rightly said. But then, can you talk a little bit about the uniqueness of video games as a medium? What makes it unique? What makes it different from all the other mediums of communication or mediums of entertainment that have existed before video games arrived in the 1970s in the US? What makes it unique?
So
Soumya, you
Yeah,
okay?
sure. I can take that. I think I touched upon it a bit earlier, which is that it is not a passive medium. It's something where, the player takes action to drive the story forward or do various things inside the game, which changes the state of the world rather than, just reading or watching a movie or watching a TV show where you're simply just consuming what is already there on the screen. Here you can take decisions. So that lends itself more to immersion, to a lot more, identification with the characters that you're playing. So, for example, you don't say, "Oh, Commander Shepard died." You say, "Oh no, I died," or "I jumped off the top of this tower and fell into a haystack." So that is what makes games different from anything else, and that is why they need to be studied, and the impact needs to be assessed on a much different level than any other field of entertainment or media.
Right. Um,
So yeah, so just adding to that, I think I like to think of games as this dream experiences, essentially, and where all of us can experience the same dream but very differently. And I think video games allow you to do that. So as a designer, I have crafted one experience for you, but it's not 100% necessary that you will follow it through the same loop. Because you're experiencing it differently, because of the emotions you might go through while playing that game, can be very different from another person, and which is, I think, brilliant. Like when it's imagination, and yet there's something already there. It's an interactive imagination of sorts. So I would like to say that being in a dream and you still have some control within it is the kind of experience that games provide you, and that sets it apart. And this is also why we actually identify player personas in game and divide them according to like what is it that they try to do. Like a game might offer you multitudes of things, and some people are like, achievers. They want to like clear everything, and some people are just happy exploring and just finding the world, and some people are there to just master the game. And these are all different personas, and at times you can take multiple personas too, and that can, it's not necessary you will ever be fixed. So that beautiful state a particular game can give you and multitudes of game can give you, I think that sets it apart as well.
Absolutely. The both of you have actually completely covered this topic. There's not much more I can contribute on this front, actually.
All right, then. Moving on. The first video game company that is said to have started in India. We will come back to India and move our focus a little bit local. The first company said to have been started in India that produced video games or that worked in the video games industry is said to have been started in the late 1990s, and which I would say would be almost 30 years or 40 years after games were already popular in the US in the 1970s. And since then, how do you see the Indian video game ecosystem evolving? How has that changed in terms of both the production as well as the market? Poornima, you can maybe start with for that.
So when we actually started that early, most of the games that was being done was more on an outsourced model. Like we were catering to the Asia Pacific, Europe, or American market, right? And we are licensing games, we're making it for them and pushing it. A lot of was based on art outsourcing because we still hadn't like got into the entire development culture. And so that's where it originally started. But because of that, we were in a place where newer people started to like, you know, then like started off, and everyone wanted to get into this business. And that started to like bring about this whole Indian gaming industry ecosystem. And originally we started with maybe just art outsourcing, then we started full on game development. Back when I was working at India Games, we actually had a unit that made India-centric games. I was working on the 3D side of things. We were catering to the American audience and the Asia Pacific audience. And but we also had that Indian arm back there itself. But these are talking about feature phones, right? At that time, we had to go through operators to actually have something delivered, and they have to give their sign off, and then they take their price cut. So we have to validate on a lot of stuff there. We may get featured, we may get that spot that month or not. It doesn't matter. But now it has become a whole lot different. Like what Shagun had pointed, development also with Unity, Unreal, and all these engines being free has become so easy. Like we used to struggle with one of the engines that rendered 3D, and we ended up writing our own engine to support the games we want to make. But that's not the case right now. I don't need to spend an effort in trying to create an engine. I can actually take one existing engine and make one game. Publishing has become easy. I can self-publish. I can actually tie up with publishers who are waiting, whether you're talking about the hyper-casual market or a free-to-play or premium games. We have plenty of publishers available out there, and we can tie up. And India as such has always been known as an outsourcing arm, but we have some brilliant game developers out here. And I'm really glad to see some of our indie game developers are trying to make their mark by creating content that's different and not necessarily just India centric, but quality global content also is being created now. I think we are in that, we're still very early, we're still very niche, but it's good to see that this is happening, because the larger companies that are here are always like, you know, byproducts of the MNCs, and we are just supporting them but not really creating anything new. So I'm really glad that we are going in the right direction. It's time we showcase. I mean, we are such an old industry at this point, but like India, we are still this developing state, right? And I think it's time to make that mark, to show our presence out there.
That's really interesting, Poornima, and I can't agree with you more. I think what's also interesting to consider is the rise of games adjacent spaces in India. Industries like the gamification space, games for learning, serious gaming, those things have also come up in tandem with the games industry. And I think in the last 8 years, that has also grown significantly, although at the game conferences, you'll find that they're still fairly well enmeshed. And also you have now streaming and esports that's also growing out of India.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, can't disagree with anything you folks have said. So it's interesting to me because the way I conceptualize the game space in India, it's sort of, divided into three categories almost, which is that India as a market of game consumers, India as a base of games development, and India as a base of, creativity in games. And I think traditionally in the industry, in the world at large, these three things are very closely tied together. But in India, they're almost separate and they've evolved on their own unique tracks. And I think that now, because of all the things that we've talked about, accessibility of the technology, of engines, of knowledge, all three of these things are actually sort of poised to explode. I would say that they haven't yet. We are seeing a lot of creators who have made who have made decent financial fortunes based on their games. I don't think anything has touched the international market quite yet, but I think it's on its way, and I'm really glad to see how it's developing as well. And of course, India, as a market of players, again, I think traditionally, compared to the rest of the world, revenue has not been that great, but because games are gaining more wide acceptance these days as a medium of entertainment. I mean, I can think back, 5 years, maybe even 10 years back, the idea of spending on a game was just, anathema. Like you couldn't do it. Nobody was interested in doing that. But I think now it's just gaining wider acceptance because of this.
Right. So I was coming to that, exactly that, Saumya, the economy aspect of the video games production as well as the consumption. I have heard a lot of times that people in India do not want to pay for games, and which is why many of the game developers in general try to target the audiences or the players in other developed already mature video game markets like the US or Germany or maybe South Korea or Japan. So how do you see that changing? Or like Soumya, you already said that it's already changing. The mindsets are changing, and there is gradually the acceptance for video games is increasing. But do you still see that? Maybe Poornima and Shagun can talk about it. That do you see that as a fact? Is it true that Indians don't want to pay for games, something like games?
Urma, you want to take this one?
I'll go after you.
Well, I think that the answer to some degree is yes. In terms of, so I don't work in freemium anymore, but in my experience of being in freemium, a lot of the revenue that came out of India in the mobile space was through ad generation, through watching ads, as opposed to direct payments in games, in-app purchases. I think a lot of it comes down to also, there are a lot of related factors, right? That you think about credit card penetration, means of online payment, payment portals in, how do you buy games on the internet? And the fact of the matter is, if once you buy them, also how do you store them? How do you own them? And with internet the way it is, which is that it's not equal in its penetration across India, you also find that video games are a luxury product which only hit a very small percentage of the market. There's this myth of the Indian market which is supposed to equal 1+ billion people, which is not really true. So when studios come here from abroad and they think of that and then they don't get those numbers, you see a lot of other cascading effects. To answer your question very simply, I think it's true. A lot of Indians, if you generalize, do not pay for video games, would rather not buy video games outright. I think also culturally, and this is just a very subjective thing, but I think as a people, we are very touch and feel. We want to fiddle with something. We'd rather go to a chroma and use the phone before we buy it. We want to tinker with the laptop. And the idea of like free to play games helps you do that. You buy the game, you get your experience of it, and people tend to be okay waiting through those payment pinch points and just saying, I'll wait for like 6 hours for my health to come back in Candy Crush so I can keep playing it rather than pay money. Yeah, it's a little incoherent, but I've left lots of seats for Poornima to tell us more.
Yeah, so pretty much like what Shagun said, right? But it's slightly changing with these payment wallets that are coming through. And then again, we are not completely capturing the entire population, but most of it is getting there slowly and steadily. And another thing, interesting thing is PUBG as a game. There are a lot of payers from India, which is quite surprising. But if you actually think about the rest of the balancing, it's not that surprising at all, because streaming, like Shagun earlier mentioned, has become a huge culture right now. And in streaming, you need to have some of the better gears to show off. You need to be able to stand aside, like stand apart from someone else. So what happens is eventually the spend goes into the game. So these are free to play games that essentially is free to consume. But if you want to like stand apart from someone, you have to like purchase some of the products from there. So people are tending to move towards that. And generally, I think as a culture, we are not that familiar with gaming itself. Like we have offline gamings, we have our board games or card games that we play, which is why our teen patties and all take off really well, because that's part of something that we have grown up with. Versus playing a platformer or something has been a luxury to a few of us who are like still paying for games maybe, but not to all access. Like tier 3 cities and all have not accessed this, so they don't have that connect right now. It's slowly changing, but it'll take some time. It's same like how the movie industry started. Like earlier, people, not everyone went to movies. It was luxury, and now anyone can consume movies. And with streaming platforms, with OTT platforms we have, it's become even more simpler. So I think it's just a matter of time for us to get the whole gaming culture into it. And with things like Candy Crush, Angry Birds, and PUBG right now, that penetration is happening. Like suddenly someone says Candy Crush, even my mom is familiar with it. And even same with Angry Birds, we had like so many fake T-shirts and other goodies being sold out there. People started connecting with it. They knew what it was. I think we need to enter that zone where it has become a part of us for us to be able to pay for it. I think right now we don't think there is value in paying for something. We are slowly creating that value, and then I think we will convert more people into payers.
Poornima, you said something really interesting over there, which I'd like to touch upon, is on, actually, wait, let me just think about it. But it's one consequence of one thing that's happening in the global games marketplace is things like is a subscription model, which Indians are we're getting habituated towards with Hotstar, with Netflix, with Prime. Now you have video game Xbox Pass, for example, by Microsoft, which says you pay a fairly small amount for the value you're getting, and you get like $3.99 or something a month, and you're getting access to hundreds of games. And it's an interesting thing to think about how that will also drive penetration in its own way, drive conversion. So when people say, I'm going to get access to so much, that sense of paisa vasool, I'm going to get bang for my buck. And that might also drive conversion. It's also interesting to think about cyber cafe culture, how people overcome their perhaps lack of personal accessibility by spending a small amount to go to a cyber cafe and then play from a basket of games that are there.
How useful do you think video games could be in addressing some of the pertinent issues or the various concerns that we have as a society in India? Do you see some potential that video games have by themselves in addressing those concerns? So I am talking about useful gaming or serious gaming, like Shagun was mentioning. So can you maybe tell our audience something about what is happening in those areas in terms of serious gaming or useful gaming? How can video games be something that can help in bringing about a positive change in the society? Is there some potential in video games that we can look forward to in the future?
I'm going to slightly bifurcate from it and generally talk about games as positive change and social change. There are games, one which is very close to my heart is a game called Gris. It essentially deals with the 5 stages of grief. You play the game and you actually experience it through gameplay, how you overcome these stages and you finally reach that acceptance, right? There is Celeste, which is based on depression. There is Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, which is based on psychosis, if you're talking about mental illness. There are so many games to name that actually make it relatable for you. It connects with you and kind of helps you in easing through that process, whether you have experienced it or not. Zeus was one of the games that attracted me to Greek mythology. Age of Empires taught me about different history. I learned about Byzantine Empire, I learned about Persian empires. So for me, I think video games were this subconsciously start teaching me through gameplay. And I feel we have that great potential to bring in the right amount of change.
It's really interesting to think of games as media artifacts which have so much intersectional value. Like what Poornima has been talking about, you have games which are explicitly designed as experiences where the developer wants to have a dialogue with you, where they want to tell you that, this is a story about depression, this is a story about gender, these are experiences that they want to, it's a conversation. They want you to experience that and understand, have that relatability and context. I won't say that's serious gaming, I'll say that's gaming with a message. Because ultimately it's still supposed to be soulful, it's still supposed to be a story. At least in the work that I do, we use games as educational tools for children. Games are a great way of getting people to stand in somebody else's shoes and maybe think about something that exists outside their echo chamber.
Right. I was just going to sort of underline all of this by saying that, I think at base, what is happening is that games tap into a very basic facet of human psychology, which is that when things are fun, we want to do it more. And when things are not fun, we try to avoid it at all costs. So education and studies and, trying to change someone's mindset generally are not fun. So when we can sort of bring games into that, it makes it a lot easier and it sort of helps to drive that change and those behaviors, more effectively.
I would like each one of you to mention about some video games that you would definitely recommend our audiences to play.
Really depends from person to person and what experience they're looking to have right now. So, if you want to explore a beautiful and dangerous underwater world, then play Subnautica. If you want to, play a mage casting spells and saving the world, play Dragon Age. If you want to be, running around rooftops and mercilessly slaughtering or saving, guards and civilians and using magic powers as well, play Dishonored. And if you really like renovating houses, play House Flipper. It's really addictive. I'm addicted to it.
The first game I would love to recommend to everyone of any age is Minecraft. It is something that changed the genre. In simply put, it is virtual Lego. There is also a Lego XP of Minecraft, which is great. But it's a game that can be enjoyed by people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, with their grandchildren. It can be enjoyed by young parents with their kids. It's something that's loved by everyone 4 and up. The other game that I would really like to recommend to you, and I'm going to stick to 3s because I think we're all sticking to that, is the game Portal. Portal is another one of those genre-bending, mind-boggling, delightful puzzle games where you play as a robot, or if you play with a friend, then it's 2 robots, just trying to navigate rooms with their little portal guns that let them play with physics. It's absolutely delightful. It will change the way you think about video games.
There is something called Baba Is You. I think it's brilliant design. It's a sweet puzzle game and it is just about logic and how you interpret things, how you can change the rules of the system and make way to the ending. And this one is called Hatoful Boyfriend. It's a visual novel. Hatoful Boyfriend, I suggest everyone should check it out. At the outset, it looks very different. It's about you being a girl belonging to, you are a human and you have to romance multiple pigeons in a school, in a college for pigeons. It sounds ridiculous, but there's actually a very deep meaning as you go into the game.
With that, I thank all our panelists today who shared bits of their life experiences and what they feel about video games and how video games can be used for a positive social change.